So I've been fortunate enough to get my hands on both of the latest next-gen consoles, in Sony's PlayStation 5 and Microsoft's Xbox Series X. The hardest thing about making this video is knowing that for a decent majority of you out there, that's going to be the biggest challenge. However, in your wait, constant refreshes of stock and whatnot, hopefully this video helps you make your decision on which console to get. Hey everybody, my name's Adrian for Digital Dojos, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Xbox Series X versus Sony's PlayStation 5. So I'm approaching this from the perspective of a gamer who has to choose between one or the other in terms of consoles. I recently did a video on the state of gaming as a whole from PC to consoles, but I wanted to focus on the newer next-gen consoles right now, given that I've had time to try out both of these with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. However, if you had to choose one, or if I had to return one and sell the other, what would it come down to? So let's take a look. First off, let's start with the technical aspects, taking a look at the hardware, the design, and of course, the price point. Starting with Sony's PS5, you have the AMD Ryzen chipset powering all of it from the CPU and GPU. This is the Zen 2 architecture, 3.5 gigahertz base clock rate, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, support for up to 8K in terms of resolutions, 120 Hz support now with HDMI 2.1 spec, and of course the new flash storage, the new NVMe based storage, or PCIe based storage I should say, at 825 gigabytes. I think that translates to roughly like 600 something after system and OS updates. But yeah, that's what you're rocking with the Sony PlayStation 5. A lot of next gen hardware packed in there, from the RAM to the hard drive. And then on the opposing side of things, with the Series X, you're taking a look at also an AMD Ryzen powered machine, chipset, same setup, Zen 2 architecture. However, you're looking at a 3.8 gigahertz base clock. Again, support for 8K resolution, 120 Hz with HDMI 2.1. 16 gigabytes of RAM as well. However, here you're looking at a 1 terabyte NVMe based SSD. Now this is slightly more. I think it roughly comes out to 800 something after, again, system and updates, with support for things like DirectX ray tracing on the Xbox side of things. So in terms of pure specs and technical aspects, the Xbox is slightly beefier on paper. However, how that all translates in terms of real world performance, well, honestly, they're pretty identical. Either way you go on these next gen consoles, you really can't go wrong. They're both super powerful machines and really, really great hardware, all being powered by that AMD chipset. Now, while the Xbox offers some great features like the quick resume, which makes switching between games feel a bit more instantaneous and does give it that next-gen feel, for the most part, in terms of real-world performance, you're going to get faster loading times, you're going to get faster in-game performance, faster boot times, all of that great stuff on either console. Of course, both sport new designs. The PS5 going for a more futuristic, almost alien spaceship router looking like design that is either hit or miss for some, to the Xbox Series X taking on a more subtle and modern aesthetic in that typical kind of boxed fashion that we've seen, well, Xboxes come in the past. Both run quiet in terms of thermals and performance. In my experience, both have, been running for hours at a time without ramping up in terms of actually hearing the fans. I will say my Series X is slightly louder only due to the fact that it has an optical drive and my PS5 is the digital edition. Outside of that, everything has been smooth in terms of actual in-game performance, sans some hiccups, which we'll talk about in a second. Again, there are two caveats here when it comes to considering both sides of the hardware. One, you do have a Series S edition that comes in at $300 for 1440p gaming. That's much more affordable on the Series X and S side of things for Xbox. While on the PlayStation side, you only have a digital edition or non-digital edition, simply taking out the optical drive. So there are different specs on the Xbox side. There are two different models, to keep that in mind. That's just a hardware difference in terms of the models out there. Sony also packs in new hardware in terms of the controller that it comes with out of the box, however. And this new DualShock controller is really one of the big selling points, actually, of Sony's PlayStation 5. The adaptive triggers and the haptic feedback, the built-in microphone, the touchpad, this is really what sells the Sony PlayStation 5 DualShock controller as a next-gen controller, whereas Xbox took the kind of, if it's not broke, don't fix it route. The DualShock controller triggers allow you to get adaptive feedback depending on the game you're playing. If you're playing a gun game, certain gun games support different trigger responses based on the gun you're using. And NBA 2K21, for example, fatigue players are hard to shoot with, and you get more of a resistance in the triggers. All of this really adds to that immersive experience while playing on the PS5 from a hardware perspective. So across the board here, you can't really go wrong from a technical standpoint. They both have extremely great hardware. However, in my opinion, Sony's PlayStation 5 and in part their controller gives it that slight edge in terms of a next-gen feel. In terms of price point, we're looking at a standard $500 roughly in the US for each console at the base standard. The Series X base model, the PlayStation 5 base model, both have optical drives. If you sans the optical drive, you can save $100 in the digital edition for Sony. And then on the Xbox side, if you really didn't care about things like 4K gaming and whatnot, you can go for the Xbox Series S at $300. But again, it's not a true apples to apples comparison in the sense that the Series S is nowhere in terms of hardware performance compared to that of the digital edition of the PS5. But that all said, again, for the base models, $500, extremely great price point, really great bang for your buck here in terms of the hardware that you're actually getting. In terms of the software that powers both of these consoles, or the OSs, so to speak, the PS5 offers a newer UI coming from the PS4 dashboard, whereas the Xbox kind of stays with that similar Windows tiled-like interface. Again, both are fairly easy to use here, and while there's some exceptions and differences in terms of feature and functionality, they are for the most part the same, and it's going to depend on your familiarity with the previous consoles. But again, both allow you to do things like stream. You can record gameplay footage on them inside the console or internally on the console. You have apps like Netflix, YouTube, etc. that you can watch. So they offer all the current gen features that a console should. Next up, a category that will probably change on how you approach which console you aim to get, and that is gaming libraries. So now what makes a truly next-gen console is like the games that are released with it at launch, the backwards compatibility, the enhancements to previous edition games that came out late on the previous models and whatnot. And with this, let's take a look at how it breaks down. On the Sony side of the house, in terms of exclusives out of the gate, they had a bit more, and by a bit I mean they had some, because Xbox had none really. You had Spider-Man Miles Morales, which was highly reviewed for great reasons. You had Demon's Souls, you had Sackboy, you also had Astro's Playroom, which came out with everybody's PlayStation 5 to really demo that PlayStation 5 controller and experience. All of this led to actually having new next-gen titles that utilize the hardware and the performance that you can actually try out and visually see on the PlayStation 5. Adversely, on the Series X side of things, unfortunately, due to delays, there were no release of Halo at launch and whatnot, so there weren't actually any true exclusives. And at the time of this recording in March of 2021, technically the only true exclusive that's been coming out since then has been the Medium for the Xbox Game Pass series, which by all means is a great game and shows off some great functionality and technical perspectives in terms of graphics and performance. But again, at launch and just in general, we don't have that vast exclusive libraries that a lot of people associate with the new next-gen consoles. That makes you want to go out there and get the console in the first place. Now, of course, there's a lot of backwards compatibility on both sides. The PS5 had a lot of PS4 titles, PS3 and PS2 titles out there that are compatible on the PlayStation 5, as well as the Xbox Series X really building out their backwards compatibility list. Furthermore, the one saving grace for Xbox has been Game Pass. At nearly $15 a month, depending on the plan that you get access to hundreds and hundreds of games from Xbox's library. And that includes 360 games, past Xbox original titles, and so on. And again, this is really where the saving grace for Xbox has come, in that you get really, really great titles for a truly great deal at this monthly installment to get all those games. Again, the Medium, which I talked about as being one of the first exclusives, is actually available on the Game Pass subscription. Furthermore, you did get Xbox Series X and S optimized games at launch of the Series X. So games like Forza Horizon 4, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, as well as Gears 5 got improvements for the Series X in particular. We saw Sony do something similar with God of War and Ghost of Tsushima, for example, one of my favorite games that I've been playing, get that 60 FPS boost, where they were really limited on that of the PS4 Pro hardware even. You got to see the true utilization of how they would fit on a next-gen console with these slight optimizations and newer hardware. So again, both had some improvements for backwards compatibility, and that's why this category is a little bit split for me. Exclusives for sure go to Sony just because they had some, whereas backwards compatibility, due to that Game Pass, I think in terms of deals, even comparing it to PS Plus and PS Now, Xbox really does take the cake in that sense. Ultimately, it comes down to what games you want to play and where your friends are playing. All of that being said and taken into account, what next-gen console for me has gravitated towards me picking up that controller more in the living room? What have I been spending more time with in general? what feels more of a complete package as far as a next-gen console. And when I say that, I take into account gamers who can only choose one right now. Maybe they're coming from a background where they never really console gamed, or they're kind of getting back into it like myself. Maybe they're a PC gamer like myself and want a console for the first time again in terms of next-gen. And most importantly, coming from the fact of how does it feel coming from a PS4, coming from an Xbox Series 1 and whatnot. And for me, hands down, it has to be the Sony PlayStation 5 as of right now. It offers the more complete package in terms of exclusive titles at launch, offering great enhancements for previous games on the PS4 that were popular titles. Its overall performance in conjunction with its support for newer hardware like the new DualShock controller and scalability, as well as the announcement of the new VR headset that's going to be coming out for the PS5, I feel like they're taking more advantage of the hardware at play to really offer a newer, more next-gen experience out of the box. In my time with the Series X thus far, I haven't found a great title that I wanted to play that was limited to Xbox, in part due to the fact that they didn't have major exclusives at launch. Now that may change weeks, years down the road, and they're already making great progress and steps towards that with the purchasing of things like Bethesda or the Game Pass expansion and the library that they're adding on there. But that, coupled with the fact of some performance issues out of the box with my Xbox Series X, plagued a kind of bad initial first impressions for me. I had connection issues with my controllers. I had certain games crash a lot that were, next-gen X optimized games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as well as having issues with just physically. My controller had a manufacturing defect that a lot of old users experience on the Xbox Series 1. I actually physically opened my controller and fixed a sticky trigger just to get it to work. And that was only after the second week of using my new console. So for me, again, out of the box, this PlayStation 5 just felt like a more complete experience. This is also coming from the fact that I'm a PC gamer first and foremost, and the Xbox experience, even in conjunction with Game Pass, kind of felt like a familiar environment. A lot of those games I could already get on or had on my PC. Now, that all said, again, if I could only get one or if I had to return one, I would have to stick with the PS5 overall right now where we're at in this current landscape. Both are great consoles from a technical perspective. You're going to get great graphics. You're going to get great performance across the board. Both are great upgrades from their predecessor, but the PS5 for me just feels like a newer next-gen experience when you consider all the factors into account. So, with that all said, regardless of what you choose, I hope this video helps steer you in the direction and or reinforces your direction or your choice in terms of purchasing your next-gen console. And with that, stay tuned for the upcoming in-depth reviews of each console. Be sure to subscribe for that and thumbs up this video if you enjoyed it. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot for watching and happy gaming.